this is Marshall Goldsmith. Welcome to LinkedIn Live. We have a wonderful, wonderful show today, leading and following in a time of crisis with a very, very, very special guest. First, let me introduce myself, then my comrade Sanyin, and then we will begin. My name is Marshall. I'm from Kentucky. I went to school in Indiana. I got a PhD at UCLA. I was a college professor and dean when I was very, very, very young. And then for 43 years, I've done three things. I traveled around the world giving talks and teaching classes. I've been to 102 countries, have 11 million frequent flyer miles just on American Airlines. And then two, as I've coached executives. Had the honor of being the coach of the CEOs of Ford, Pfizer, Glaxo, New York Public Library, World Bank, on and on and on. And what I love about coaching is that's where I learned everything. Although I was supposed to teach these wonderful people, I always learn far more than I teach because they're just great, great people. And then I'm writing, edit books and articles. I've written or edited, was 41, now 42 books. I've done 6 bestsellers and the other 36 purchased by my mother, my father, and associated relatives. And I came up with a great idea called 100 Coaches. I decided to adopt 15 people, teach them all I know for free, and the only price is when they get old, they do the same thing. I made a little video and put it here on LinkedIn. I thought maybe 100 people would apply and I'd adopt 15 people. It turned out 18,000 people applied, and we've adopted now over 280 people. It's just a wonderful organization. And one of my all-time favorite honorary daughters is my comrade and host on this show, Sanyin. Now, Sanyin is a wonderful human being. General Marty, who's with us today, Sanyin, I used to be ranked #1 coach in the whole world. Yet now I'm in what they call the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame. I don't know, General Marty, if they've given you these Lifetime Achievement Award and Hall of Fame. That's where they put old people, And now the new #1 coach, according to Thinkers 50, is my comrade Sanyin Chong. Sanyin is a wonderful, wonderful person, a #1 coach in the world. And Sanyin, why don't you introduce yourself and then our wonderful guest, General Marty.
Thanks, Marshall. And the reason why I'm able to achieve what I have been able to achieve is because of tremendous mentors. And I have 2 of my favorite and most meaningful mentors on this show today. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanyin Siang. I help leaders and their organizations be more resilient and thrive in terms of uncertainty by reimagining the future and also through team building. I work with CEOs, board directors, military generals, and students, because I am also the executive director at the Coach K Center on Leadership and Ethics at Duke University's Buchel School of Business. And I'm also a mom. And it is, oh my gosh, I can't stop smiling because we get to have a conversation with one of my favorite leaders today, and that's General Marty Dempsey. And by the way, your title, General Dempsey is the 18th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Can we please have his proper title?
Let's tell the truth. We all know that you're the one that put the title in.
All right, so here's a brief introduction about General Dempsey. I cannot hold any leader in greater esteem than I hold General Marty Dempsey. First, he is a devoted family man. He's a loyal friend. He's a singer of Irish ballads. And later on the show, if there's time, maybe we can ask you to sing. And he is also a brilliant teacher. In his time after retirement from the military, General Dempsey also teaches leadership to our MBA students at the Buchel School of Business and continues to be a mentor to so many. With Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential Leaders. When he was 18th chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he led more than 1 million troops. He is now the chairman of USA Basketball. And if you haven't read his books yet, I would encourage you. His first book is Radical Inclusion, and that had, along with Ori Brofman, they co-authored that book, and it's transformative. And then his new book is No Time for Spectators. And so with that, before I forget, questions. So audience members, as you're watching this, if you have a question, be sure to comment in the comment box, and we will get to your questions later on in the show. And then if you are listening and you like something that you hear, For example, when Marshall breaks into song, be sure to hit that like or love button. So, Marshall, why don't you kick us off with a question?
Okay, General Marty, very honored to have you on our show today. First, in your book, No Time for Spectators, you have a phrase, living a felt life. Can you kind of elaborate? What do you mean by that?
Sure. Let me assure your audience, first of all, that I will make sure that we run the shot clock out so that we don't hear you sing. So I'll be giving really long answers to really short questions. Thanks for having me on. When I got to West Point, myself and my classmates were packed into an auditorium and for an orientation. It was the middle of August, no air conditioning. We were just miserable, really. So the head of the English department was up there. I don't know what he was doing up there, but at some point he said, the only thing I want you to remember from my introduction today is that I want you to live a felt life. And I kind of snapped back into the moment, realizing I had been guilty of doing exactly what he was accusing us of, which is kind of wishing away unpleasant experiences and, just getting ahead of ourselves and missing out on an opportunity to actually feel the life you have in the moment. And that became an important part of what I believe is the key to a very positive and productive leader-follower relationship. Everyone's got to not only just execute or implement, but feel. And I'll just give you one quick example of where that really came home to roost for me. When I was working for President Obama as his military advisor, you want to know, do you have that person's trust? And what I concluded was that, the senior person can say, I trust you, which he did, but it's really more about feeling it. And then I reflected back in my life in those relationships where you could just feel the trust and confidence.
That's really beautiful because in this pandemic right now, we are all feeling, and it reminds me of something that Coach has taught us. It's not enough to know something. We have to feel it. And you talked about this relationship between the leader and the follower. And in your book, you had talk about, in fact, one of the key takeaways for the book, No Time for Spectators, is that the best leaders learn to follow first. That's a little bit of a radical concept. Can you describe what that means and why do you think it takes a specific type of effort to be able to follow?
Well, after I wrote the first book, I realized it had been written exclusively from the perspective of how to become a better leader, but that's only half of the equation inside of any organization, inside of a family for that matter. And what I wanted to do was get after the other half of the equation. That is to say, leaders, there are expectations of leaders, but we should be open and transparent and inclusive about what our expectations are of followers. So it's kind of a two-way street, right? And so I wanted to write a book about both sides of the equation. I didn't want to put the title, followership, because who'd walk through an airport and buy that book? So what I came up with, building on this idea of a felt life, is this idea that in order to really belong, we should have common expectations of each other. Then I tried to using my own stories to elaborate on those attributes, those qualities, those common expectations, in an era where, things can be a little confusing because of ubiquitous information and intense scrutiny and all that.
Yeah. Something I've learned from you, it resonates, is when's the last time you've allowed a subordinate to change your mind? And I always try to remember that, because whether we're leading or we're following, we have to have that openness to allowing others to change, to influence us, and to change our minds with the data that they have in today's world. So thank you so much for that. Marshall, reflections and
I got a question. I have a couple of questions. Question number one is, I've done 8 programs at my house with retiring people who are like CEOs. General Shinseki was actually one of them. And, I find it really interesting because I'm sure, General Marty, when you were the chief of staff, everybody laughed at your jokes and saluted a lot. And pretty much everything you said was profound. What's it been like when you've been in this big job as everybody's saluting and jumping around, being back to being like a regular old normal guy? What's some of your reflections to that?
Well, to be honest with you, I always tried to surround myself with people who would allow me to stay grounded and to be genuinely humble about the opportunity I've been given. And by the way, I say this in the book as well. Being humble it's not just an ideology or a belief system that I follow. It's pragmatic. I mean, if you're humble, you're approachable. If you're approachable, people are more likely to tell you when things are going well, tell you when they're not going well, make suggestions, and expect that you'll actually give them consider. I've always tried to surround myself with people that help me ground, and to include in my choice of wife, who in any speech I've ever given in my entire life has never given me more than a B. So, in your book, she's never given you. Yeah, you're doing better than me. In the book, in your book, you talk about a fascinating concept: responsible rebelliousness. Yeah.
Responsible rebellion. What's that mean?
Well, first of all, it's there's 9 chapters in the book where I try to unpack the 9 what I think are the most important attributes, the most important lessons, if you will, about being both a good leader and a credible, reliable, trusted follower. And I use a little alliteration. There's the limits of loyalty. There's a chapter about sensible skepticism, and then the penultimate chapter is actually this chapter called responsible rebelliousness. And I chose that phrase because if you think about how change occurs in any organization, or even if you want to describe it as innovation, it's generally because someone is pushing on the edges of routine and normal and expected processes. And I think you'll never find it on an organizational PowerPoint slide of organizational values, but you can find it in an organization's culture where the leadership leaves space and allows followers and subordinates, if you will, to have confidence that they can, in order to get the job done, given the intent provided by the senior leaders, that they can kind of push on the edges of normal practices, because that's the way innovation occurs, with people pushing on the edges. But it can't be self-aggrandizing. It can't be for personal gain. It has to be for the greater good of the organization.
Thank you. Sanyin.
That's wonderful. So, I'll have one more question before we jump to Justin for his questions from the audience. So this book has been released during a global pandemic. It's this unprecedented time in our nation's history. What can this book teach us about our current pandemic crisis? Like, help us see things differently.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. I started writing it 18 months ago with the motivation that, I'd felt that things were getting, a lot more complex, moving a lot more quickly, that leaders were under intense scrutiny, that we were becoming more polarized in our thinking, and that, what we really need, and what was that was doing was, it was paralyzing people. So, people were kind of going to their own corners and yelling at each other, across the arena. And it occurred to me that what we really should do is encourage everyone. If you're not content with the way things are going, then do something other than just complain about it. The pandemic came along, and let me say this about this pandemic: it's the first crisis that we've faced in the era of social media. So it is playing out real time. You simply can't escape it. Secondly, what we're really talking about when you say there's a pandemic and it's a public health crisis is what's being generated is fear. Fear that you'll catch it, fear that a family member will catch it, fear that it'll so affect the economy that our very way of life will be irreparably damaged. So what leaders are really dealing with and what followers are really experiencing is fear. And there's only one antidote to fear, and that's a sense of belonging. I tell people in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever we ask soldiers to walk out the gate of a base camp and go on patrol is the only reason they would do that, because they're rational human beings, is if they felt this sense of belonging on a team and they trusted the man or woman to their left or right. And so if we're facing something that, when you actually distill it, is really an environment of fear, the only antidote is a sense of belonging. And that's what we should be working on. And that's why this book feels to me as though it came at a very timely moment.
Very good.
Thank you so much for that. Before we jump to personal reflections, let's go to Justin. Justin, what questions do we have?
Hey everybody, this is Brent Klein from the Methods Question Control Center. Justin had to drop off for just a moment. We're trying to get him back. However, I do have a question here coming from Kate Clark for the General. It asks, she says, when you became chairman, you had a person learning campaign manager. Why?
Well, what happened was, in my first couple of meetings with President Obama, I'd go into the Situation Room for a National Security Council meeting. And if you're on the council, you go to the meeting, even if it doesn't fall, if the subject doesn't fall into your particular area of expertise. So even, for example, the Keystone Pipeline, we went to a meeting about that. And the first couple of meetings, frankly, I didn't prepare myself. And then I got in there and actually what happened was I got caught kind of not in the moment. I wasn't there. And the president used it as a teaching for a moment for everyone and said, when I bring you in here, what I really need for you to do is surprise me or help me connect things, even if it's not in your expertise. And so what I did is I went back to my staff and I said, okay, I got to get a lot smarter than I am to be the chairman of the Joint. I know all I need to know about the military. I don't know anything about public health. I don't know really as much as I should about the budget process. I don't know enough about, the economics that might be affecting our allies and partners and therefore affect, our relationship. And so I started on a campaign of learning, and I challenged this young man that I asked to lead it, that every other week or so, he would put me in an environment or bring someone to me who would help me learn about something, that I really never learned about before. So it was really a matter of just making sure I continued to learn.
I love
it
that
connects
term.
back to your earlier humility. Go ahead, Marshall.
I just say I love that term. So that's one I'm going to remember. And General Marty, the first couple of times I may mention this term, I may actually credit you, but after that, I'm sure I thought of it myself.
Yeah.
Military practice.
Military leaders talk in those terms, right? We're going to be on a campaign, which is to say, string along a series of battles to reach a particular goal. And so the reason we called it a campaign of learning was it was stringing together a series of experiences. We had Laura Garrett, who's probably one of our best experts on infectious disease and pandemics, the chairman of the Fed, Angelina Jolie, about humanitarian issues. I went to the AT&T Ops Center in Morristown, New Jersey. I went to Silicon Valley. And normally we could, have the trip coincide with something else I was doing. But I always gave that guy, the campaign of learning guru, an important seat at the calendar scrub, because if I didn't support him, everybody else would just overwhelm him.
That's good.
No, I think that's a great best practice for all of us, to constantly expand our learning. Brent, is there another question?
By the way, wait, Sanyin, before you begin, I changed my job title as you suggested.
Oh. I am going to keep the show. When I'm feeling down, I'm going to bring up the show and watch it, because thank you for the moment of joy today. Brent, do we have another question?
Yes, we've got another question coming in from Luke Yorger. He asks, what is your major learning as a general that relates directly to civilian leaders?
Well, first of all, I think the tenets, if you will, of leadership are universal. I mean, the same things that made me an effective military leader are this. I'm guessing, Marshall, you would agree, and Sanyin, that they're the same things that make for an effective corporate executive, especially if that corporate executive cares about building this sense of belonging and giving people the confidence that that you're going to centralize the what, but you'll decentralize the how for the organization. In terms, I tell you, to answer the question slightly differently, the one thing that I took on as the senior military officer in the armed forces was this idea that I was the steward of civil military relations. That is to say, how the United States military relates to the civilian population it serves. And that is a little more challenging than you think. It's your force. We are spread across the country, but we can't ever take that relationship for granted.
One of the reflections that I have comes from our friend Alan Mullally. General Marty, I don't know if you ever met Alan Mullally. He's a wonderful man, was the CEO of Ford and the Boeing Commercial Aircraft, and probably one of the great leaders of at least this century. And one of the great things he did is he had clear guidelines in terms of behavior. And he said, in terms of our values and behavior, there's zero tolerance for bad behavior, zero tolerance for deviation from values. And one of the great things I've admired out of some of the wonderful leaders I met in the Army and in the Navy is this same thing of, there's a lot of stuff that's negotiable and a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about and disagree about. There's some things, though, let's just don't negotiate, such as values, such as the way we treat each other. So I think that's a great point you're making, is that difference. And also I love your concept of, the centralized what and the decentralized how, because a lot of people have an image of the military as a very directive, telling people what to do and how to do it all the time. Well, and the reality is Peter Drucker talked about knowledge workers. I'm sure most of the people that you managed, especially as a general and above, they had more knowledge than you did. So you can't tell them what to do and how to do it. You have to ask, you have to listen, and you have to learn. So I think yours is a great model for leaders in any organization. Sanyin, we get time for one more question.
I was going to say, General Dempsey, there's one key takeaway that would really help our listeners today when it comes to leadership, what would it be? What one piece of advice will you give us?
I would say that if you are fortunate enough to be given a role as a leader, then lead and recognize it as a privilege, not an entitlement. Recognize your responsibility not only to deliver the bottom line, if you will, but also, as Marshall just said, it's not just about winning, it's also about how we win, especially as Americans, and especially in my case, as the military deployed around the world. So, if you're in a leadership position, then for Pete's sakes, lead, be a sense maker, especially in these times now of kind of the clash of information that we live with every day. Be a sense maker, help those who you're responsible for make sense of things. Be a good listener so that, you build confidence in your followers and trust. At the end of the day, by the way, everything that a leader does, and truth be told, everything a follower does, either contributes to a relationship of trust or detracts from it. And so, and the last thing I'd say is that I would tell everybody, look, if I can become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, then, you can be whatever you want to be.
Sanyin, we've got you to share one reflection. I want a reflection from you. You always tell me about General Marty. You've said so much about him, how much he's meant to you, and what a hero in many ways he's been for you. what's one or two of the learnings from General Marty that you would like to share that really meant a lot to you, that you'd like to share with the group?
There are so many. We touched upon in the show the personal learning campaign manager, and that stems from a source of understanding we don't have no single person has the answers. So let's go and find answers and discover answers that can from others who are experts at subjects, and be able to grow ourselves, right? And in the process of growing ourselves, that we can be better leaders for our people. And then the second is this story, make it matter. And every time I hear that story, it always brings me to tears. But I think we are put on this earth to make it matter for others. And actually, General Dempsey, why don't we end it with that? Can you share with us that story of how you came up with that phrase, make it matter? Because I think it's
obviously a longer story, but I have a walnut box right here with let me tip it so that it's not blurred out, with that phrase engraved on it, make it matter. And in the box are the cards with a picture of the soldiers that I lost in combat, in particular the period 03 to 04. And what I wanted to remember, I always carry 3 of them around with me. The other 129 are in the box, and I rotate them around. And what I wanted to remind me is that those young men and women never achieved their potential. They were taken too quickly. They willingly served, they willingly gave their lives, but they didn't achieve whatever potential they may have had as fathers and mothers and academics and governors and senior military leaders and corporate executives. So, my particular belief system is that since they didn't achieve their potential, I surely should try to achieve mine, and in so doing, honor them. And so Sanyin said, every day I try to think to myself, did I do anything today to make it matter for someone else, or has it always, has today been just about me? And by the way, oftentimes it is just about you or just about me. But if you think about making it about someone else as a habit, you're likely to make it matter, not just for yourself, but for others.
It's leading a life of significance, isn't it? And like you see, I'm tearing up every time I hear that story. I tear up because that's how we can all live this life of significance, by making it matter for someone else. Oh, thank you so much for your time and for your wisdom. I'm so lucky to have both of you in my life as mentors, and thank you for helping me to grow and sharing your wisdom with others so that we can all be better.
Thank you.
Thank you both for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.